Okay, let's get started. Welcome all to day 4 of Samvera Connect 2021. Again, we're very excited that you are here. Before we get to our first presenter, we have just some general housekeeping to go through, especially if this is your first day joining the event. First, please note this webinar has live closed captioning available. Simply click on the closed captioning button at the bottom of the Zoom window. The conference is being recorded. We'll have all videos available on the Sanvera YouTube channel, and slides will be made available in the Sanvera community repository. Attendees will receive links to both in the days and after the event. We have the Q&A function for your questions, and we have a Connect Slack channel for conversation. If you need access to the Sanvera Slack workspace, there's a link on Sched where you can request access. Today's session will run approximately 3 hours with 2 10-minute breaks. In the interest of maintaining a safe and cooperative environment for all Sanverans in participating in today's events, we'll read the Code of Conduct and the Anti-Harassment policy at the start of each day as a gentle reminder of how we work together and care for one another. Sanvera's Code of Conduct lays out our shared expectations for respectful communication. The Sanvera community is dedicated to providing a welcoming and positive experience for all its members, whether they are at a formal gathering, in a social setting, or taking part in activities online like today. The Sanvera community welcomes participation from people all over the world, and these community members bring with them a wide variety of professional, personal, and social backgrounds. Whatever these may be, we treat colleagues with dignity and respect. Community members communicate primarily in English, though for many of them, this is not their native language. We therefore strive to express ourselves simply and remember that unnecessary use of jargon and slang will be a barrier to understanding for many of our colleagues. We are sensitive, in fact, that the international nature of the community means that we span many different social norms around language and behavior, and we strive to conduct ourselves online and in person in ways that are unlikely to cause offense. Sanvera conversations are often information-rich and intended to generate discussion and debate. We discuss ideas from a standpoint of mutual respect and reasoned argument. The companion piece to the Code of Conduct is Sanvera's Anti-Harassment policy. It reads as follows. The Sanvera community does not tolerate harassment in any form. Sexual or discriminatory language and imagery is not appropriate for any event venue, including talks, or any community channel such as Slack-based chat rooms or mailing lists. Harassment includes offensive verbal comments related to sex, gender, ethnicity, nationality, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, age, race, or religion. Sexual or discriminatory images in public spaces, deliberate intimidation, stalking, harassing photography or recording, sustained disruption of talks or other events, inappropriate physical contact, and unwelcome sexual attention. Participants asked to stop any harassing behavior are expected to comply immediately. We expect participants to follow the Code of Conduct and Anti-Harassment policy at all meeting venues, meeting-related social events. I think I skipped ahead there. Community gatherings and online communication channels. Participants violating the Code of Conduct or Anti-Harassment policy may be sanctioned or expelled at the discretion of the Incident Response Team in accordance with the Samvera Code of Conduct Incident Response Manual. You get a link to these 2 written policies at any time by either going to the channel description at the top of the hashtag Connect Slack channel, or by typing the phrase get COC, that's get space COC, into any channel in Sanvera Slack. And we have our helpers, as always, online today. The list is here. You can contact them at any point in the Slack channel, and they will follow up to help you out. Now, if you're new to the community, there's probably a lot going on that may seem unfamiliar or unclear. It's okay to feel a little lost or out of place. Most of us did it first. Many of us have found the best way to get over our initial discomfort is to jump in by asking questions and are volunteering to help. We're an agile community working to make things better as we go, And that means everyone is qualified to help. There are no imposters here. Most of all, we want everyone to have fun, learn new things, and move Sanvera forward. Now, to start our day, I'm going to hand things over to our first presenter, Michael B Klein.
Thanks, Rick. Good morning. Please adjust this greeting accordingly for your time zone. I am Michael Klein, the developer lead in Northwestern University Library's Repository and Digital Curation Workgroup. And I'm here to talk about what's new and hopefully improved in the serverless IIIF project since I presented on it last year at Samvera Connect. This is the slide I ended on last year, showing some of the work that had yet to be completed, including deploying serverless IIIF here at Northwestern. We were using something based on a lot of the same code, but we were not actually using the serverless application that was published to Amazon serverless application repository. I am happy to report that we are 3 for 4 on this slide. We are now using serverless IIIF in both our staging and production environments. We have a workaround for the 6 megabyte API gateway limit, which I will define and address a few slides from now. Authentication and authorization are now possible through CloudFront trigger functions or hook functions. We're still using the hard-coded tile sizes and scaling listed in that third bullet point, but we'll get there eventually. It's nice to leave something for the future. One of the big changes this year is the transfer of ownership of the 2 core repositories in the project from the NU Live GitHub organization to Samvera Labs. I first proposed the transfer in the dev Slack channel on June 1st and was met with a lot of enthusiasm. I then spent 3 weeks trying to make sure we had contributor license agreements from all previous contributors and their institutions, according to Samvera's policy. And finally switched everything over to Samvera Labs on June 24th and added Dan Wolf from Notre Dame as co-maintainer of both. The hunt for CLAs led to a number of conversations involving Samvera's CLA requirement and whether it represents an unnecessary barrier to entry for contributors who might be loath to sign or may not have an attorney to review what they're signing. Other large open source projects and communities seem to get by okay without signed CLAs, and I think it's worth considering whether we can too. But getting off my soapbox there, I would like to really thank Heather Klein and Jeremy Friesen, who has since moved on to other opportunities, for helping me wrangle all of that legal stuff in the meantime. This is last year's architecture slide. We had 5 main components: the IIIF processor Node.js library, the serverless IIIF Lambda function wrapper, and the serverless application repository application that goes along with it, that wraps the IIIF processor library. The Amazon API gateway that allows us to establish a REST API to convert web requests into Lambda calls. An Amazon Simple Storage Service, or S3 bucket, for image storage, and the serverless app repository for application packaging, deployment, and versioning. We've added a couple new components, so we need some more room on this slide. We've added support for a caching CloudFront distribution that sits in front of the REST API and which also figures heavily in the workaround for the 6 megabyte response limit. And with CloudFront, we gain the option of attaching pre and post processing functions to the whole operation, which I will also address soon. I want to talk a little bit about getting around this, this limit that I've been talking about. AWS API Gateway has one major limitation in its REST APIs. Neither the request nor the response payload can be greater than 6 megabytes. And that is the base 64 encoded response. So the actual data response is more like 4.3 megabytes, but I'm going to keep using 6 just because it's easier. As a result, serverless IIIF up till now has had the same limitation, preventing us from returning some images at full resolution. But we managed to come up with a workaround that allows responses of any size without sacrificing speed or scalability, and without any kind of weird redirecting, which would make the URL change on the browser side, which, while invisible to most users, irritates me enough to have given me motivation to try to avoid it. The solution lies in CloudFront's ability to fail over to a second origin if the primary origin returns an error. It works like this. When CloudFront receives a request, it first checks to see if the object is already in the cache. If so, it returns it. So far, so good. CloudFront just doing its job, nothing required from us. If not, it sends the request to its primary origin. Now, an origin is simply a backend source that responds to path-based requests like URLs and returns data. It can be an S3 bucket, a REST API, or really any other arbitrary HTTP resource that is reachable by CloudFront. In this case, the primary origin is a REST API defined by AWS API Gateway that invokes the IIIF Lambda function and sends it the request information as a request event. The Lambda function then finds and loads the requested image from the S3 image storage bucket and processes it in accordance with the crop, size, rotation, and format parameters in the request. So far, this is how serverless IIIF has worked all along, including up until last year when I was presenting on this. But here's where it starts to look like a bit of a shell game. If the resulting image fits in less than 6 megabytes for that response payload, the function just returns it to the API gateway, which returns it to CloudFront, which returns it to the viewer. Standard operation, no workaround visible yet. This is just how API gateway works. But if the resulting image is greater than 6 megabytes, it instead writes it to a specially configured S3 bucket using the request path, this ID / IIIF parameters path as the S3 object key. So it's stored in that directory within that S3 bucket. It then returns a 404 not found response to the API gateway, which passes that response along to CloudFront. CloudFront responds to the error by resending the same request to its secondary origin, which in this case is configured as that same failover bucket where we just wrote the correct response a split second earlier. Since the response is stored using the request path, CloudFront finds it there and is able to return it to the viewer. And because it's just treating that S3 bucket as an origin, CloudFront's same caching configuration and caching behaviors apply to whatever it finds in that failover bucket. So it is transparent to the user, it's transparent to the cache. It's just this workaround that lets us say, hey, you know, this piano won't fit through the front door, let's push it out through the garage. And have the moving truck come get it from there. And this pattern will actually work for any API gateway resource backed by a Lambda function where a given request path always generates the same response. So it's not great for things that can change dynamically based on, say, like posted data or things with query parameters, unless you include those in your cache key. But it's actually a great general purpose workaround for any API gateway. Also, since we're using CloudFront for large responses and caching anyway, serverless IIIF now also supports linking viewer request and viewer response functions to its CloudFront distribution. These functions are distinct from the main IIIF function installed by the serverless application and have to exist. They must be created and deployed before the serverless application is installed. The pros and cons of CloudFront functions and Lambda ed-eng functions and how to create them and how to configure their permissions and everything is way beyond the scope of this talk, but I am always happy to answer questions or provide feedback or pointers on Slack or via email. The viewer request function is invoked as soon as CloudFront receives a request. It's invoked even if the requested URL points to something in the cache, since just because something's in the cache doesn't mean the requester is allowed to have it. A viewer request function can alter the request before it gets to the CloudFront origin, adding headers, changing the request path, changing the cache key, or any number of things. Serverless IIIF leverages the ability to alter the request by looking for two custom headers, X pre-flight location and X pre-flight dimensions, that can be added by the viewer request function to provide the S3 location of the full image or the image's full-size dimensions. People who have seen previous editions of this presentation may remember that if your images were stored in a path other than what the function expected, you had to fork the repo and deploy your own version of the project instead of deploying directly from the serverless application repository. But now you can just deploy the published app straight from AWS and install a viewer request function to handle your resolvers. If either header is present, its value will be used. If not, the default resolver will still be used for that value. So you could provide a location but not the dimensions, or the dimensions but not the location, or both. The viewer request function can also immediately return a response that is sent back to the requester instead of forwarding the request to the origin. This can be used to override the response completely, such as redirecting the request or returning a 401 or 403 status auth failure. For example, our viewer request function uses an encrypted user token in the request headers along with item visibility information stored in Elasticsearch to determine whether access should be granted to the requested image. Viewer response functions are invoked just before CloudFront returns the response to the requester. It can override any part of the response, for example, to add cross-origin resource sharing headers, or even to make a late decision to redirect or deny access, but it does not receive a copy of the Lambda-generated response body. This is because of that 6 megabyte limit. There's really no great way for us to allow it to be passed through because of that limit on Lambda functions. But if we figure out a workaround, maybe it could be used in the future, for example, to watermark full-sized images on request. There are two more CloudFront hooks that we don't use, but that are supported by both CloudFront and serverless IIIF. Origin request and origin response. Origin request happens between the viewer request and the CloudFront request to the origin. And the origin response happens on the other side after the origin request, but before the viewer response function. So it goes viewer request, viewer response, origin, origin response, viewer response. I hope I got that right. The origin response is particularly useful when you want to alter the response such that CloudFront caches the altered version. So the origin response trigger happens before CloudFront caches and writes the response to its cache, but the viewer response happens after that. So you're altering the version pulled out of the cache also. But origin request and origin response are not invoked on a cache hit, which is important. Viewer request and viewer response are invoked on a cache hit. And that brings me to the end of the new features. I know it was pretty dense. I'm happy to take questions or comments either now during the remaining few minutes of the presentation time, or at that email address displaying there, or on Slack, or you can find the repos on GitHub and tag me in issues.
Thank you, Michael. And I'm looking at the Slack channels as well as the Q&A. There's nothing in the Q&A at the moment. I did see one question in the Slack channel that may have been resolved already, I think from Jonathan Rockhind. I'll just repeat it very quickly. Unrelated, but curious about what you know about people using your IIIF servers beyond your own apps using it. What are their what are the use cases or contexts there?
I know it's in use at Princeton, and I am sure that Trey would be willing to answer some questions about their experience with it. I also know from chatting with Trey that they are sort of up to date on having installed the last version that supports the hooks. I don't know which features they're using, but I know it's there. I think Notre Dame also has it running. I'm not sure if that's just in a test environment or if it's actually in production. The Royal Pavilions, Brighton, and Hove in the UK, Ed Silverton from Nemesine has it running. And I also wanted to mention that I didn't have it on a slide, but since we've installed it, I know it's been running. This version has been running about a month with our viewer request and viewer response functions. So 3 Lambda invocations per request, unless there's a cache hit, and a lot of image processing, a lot of data passing through here. So, and in the past month, this has cost us about $30 to run. That includes the Lambda invocations, the caching, the data transfer, not the data storage, that's separate, because that's part of our preservation budget. But yeah, it's cheaper than running a dedicated server.
Great. Okay, there was one more question from Trey Pendragon. If I install this and have a bug, what's the best way to report it?
Through the Samvera Labs for now. Hopefully it will be promoted to Sanvera soon. But right now the projects are Samvera Labs, serverless IIIF, serverless-IIIF, and Samvera Labs node-IIIF on GitHub. And if you can suss out whether the bug is in the core IIIF functionality or the wrapper function, the Lambda wrapper function, that's great. Otherwise, feel free just to send the bug to serverless IIIF and we'll triage it and figure out where it belongs.
Great. And I see one question came through in the Q&A, just beat out David Schober by a millisecond, I think. So from Anthony, I've tried this and seems to work great. Are you aware of anyone who has investigated something similar on other cloud platforms such as Azure?
I do not. I know I've received some questions about whether we have plans to make other platform versions of this available. Unfortunately, I don't have the resources or access or the time or a use case at the moment to justify spending a lot of time on it. I'm definitely open to the idea. It would probably be a separate repo for each version of it. But the core concepts, I'm sure, apply depending on what features those other cloud platforms have.
Okay, 2 more questions in Slack now. So from David Schober, any designs on promoting out of labs, ?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something we want to do. We have to look back at the criteria. I know there have been a flurry of pull requests, thanks Kate Lynch for most of those, to improve the README, to add certain required files, to do I think branch renaming, various things that can get us out of labs sooner. I know I'm at the end of my time. I do want to mention that we currently support the IIIF Image API version 2.1. There's a standing issue feature request to support 3.0, and that's something we're going to look into as well.
Great. Then a question from Michael Johnson, random fact, that's also my dad's name. What role is Node.js playing here?
Node.js is the Lambda runtime for all of the code that's running. So everything that is in this part right here is written in Node.js. It's running on a Node 14.x runtime with some external modules and support code. But that's where Node.js comes into it.
Great, and I think there was just kind of more of a random comment from Carolyn Casey that we need another partner to put it into production. I think question mark requirement is 3 question mark. I think that is true.
Yeah. I'm sorry, the question is about whether other partners have put it into production?
I think so. Like, have we met the requirement of 3 yet?
Yeah, I think so. Assuming Notre Dame's is in production, but we definitely have 3 in production, us, Brighton and Hove and Princeton. So, I'm pretty sure we're at that threshold.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. We'll wait another moment here. Okay, thank you very much, Michael, for your presentation. And I think as the invention has been this week, we will keep moving ahead and maybe be a little bit of ahead of schedule until the break. Next up, we have the long and winding road transitioning from IIIF presentation 2.0 to 3.0. Karen Shaw, Adam Marling, and Matt Jordan, please take it away.
All right, we're all set there. I see the slides up. This is my name's Adam. I go by he and him, and we're going to talk a little bit about kind of our story at the Northwestern, I guess, dev team, kind of going from or considering IIIF presentation API version 2 to version 3, and kind of how we've approached that in the past, what we're doing now, and hopefully this is something that might be interesting to other institutions considering a similar transition. So before I jump into kind of frame this out a little bit, I'll let my 2 coworkers introduce themselves as well. How about Karen, or how about Matt first?
Hi, I'm Matt Jordan. I'm a front-end developer at Northwestern. Only been here about a month. I was previously at University of Tennessee. And my pronouns are he and him.
I am Karen Shaw. I am another software developer on the repository and digital curation team at Northwestern, and my pronouns are she and her.
So I guess just to get started, just to not assume that everyone might be super familiar with IIIF. So we'll just kind of start big picture here. So what exactly is IIIF? So according to the IIIF website, a growing community of the world's leading research libraries and image repositories who are working on a community framework for interoperable image, and now with the advent of 3.0 and media delivery. So IIIF, kind of its core is it can be thought of as having multiple APIs, which allow web applications to model their data, serve content, to handle authentication, and more. So you can get a lot more detailed info on the IIIF ecosystem and what some of these APIs do through their website, which we encourage all to do if you're interested. So this graphic here, I think the key takeaway is that when your custom data at your institution in any way, shape, or form you model it, when it conforms to a IIIF API spec, then any application in the world or any UI client could consume and present your data, assuming it's publicly accessible, public rights and whatnot. So, so maybe like a researcher researching from Africa could explore collections at the University of Hong Kong with mouse clicks, or one could curate their own collection of items referencing public IIIF manifests from institutions across the world. So for this presentation, we are going to focus exclusively just on the presentation API and not some of the other IIIF APIs. The presentation API describes, according to Tom Crane, who's a prominent IIIF spec author, just enough metadata to drive a remote viewing experience. So the presentation API, it's a collection of, I don't know if it's kind of hard to see, a collection of conceptual labels for how to represent an object or a thing of some sort. Version 2 of the spec was developed with representing mostly like image-based content in mind. So these could be items such as books, paintings, sculptures of scary dinosaurs or whatnot. But the 3.0 spec begins considering time-based media and beyond, potentially. So this could look like an opera, a movie, an oral history field recording, or maybe even some kind of virtual reality, or who knows what's around the corner. And this is what this presentation is really about, more or less. Our team is fast seeing a world for our collections where they don't necessarily fall into neat silos of a certain type of something. So we're beginning to experiment with multi-canvas IIIF manifests to represent something, say like a, maybe like a Johnny Cash box set or something there, or something similar, which might contain multiple videos. It has images, like a picture book. Perhaps there's some, audio interviews with Johnny Cash. Maybe even, in the future, maybe there's a Johnny Cash hologram. Who knows, right? The IIIF 3.0 presentation API is attempting to represent things that we kind of see and interact with in the real world. And our dev team would like, to attempt to emulate this, I guess, multimedia experience for end users of our applications as well.
So to tell the story of our journey to adopting IIIF Presentation 3, we need to rewind back in time to about 2019. So 2 years ago, we had two separate repositories. We had a Hyrax-based image repository and an Avalon instance for our AV materials. We were underway planning and starting to build a new repository system, Meadow, that would house both types of content. We migrated our image content first, which was earlier this year. Our old image repository had previously written IIIF Presentation 2 manifest for the ImageWorks to S3. So the migration in terms of manifest was seamless. Meadow just took over writing the manifest to the same place as our old Hyrax app did. Our publicly accessible manifest and image URLs remained consistent. Our AV content has yet to be migrated. It's slated for later this year. And initially, we were assuming that a move to AAAF version 3 would take place at some point during this migration in order to better support our AV content. But along the way, we decided not to do it, even though there were several points at which the transition would have made sense. So why not? Well, one, the spec is complex and we were moving fast towards launch and migration, and we thought we could switch to version 3 in the future when things were a bit calmer. And also our data model, which we were still in the process of defining, was challenging to map to a manifest. We hadn't made core decisions and didn't until actually after images were migrated about whether, for example, image works would contain AV content. We were concerned about our existing image manifests. We didn't want to break them. They were in use, possibly and hopefully beyond our own institution. We were concerned about viewer support of the 3.x spec. Our React OpenSeaDragon viewer that we were using would need some work to support v3. We also didn't want to change publicly accessible or publicly available current manifest content or URLs. So in a nutshell, we were thinking about this as a big move from 2 to 3, updating our image manifest and viewer and totally dropping support for 2 altogether. And it was overwhelming to us. So what we decided to do instead was not produce any manifests at all for our AV content. We would just retrieve file set info and metadata, either from Elasticsearch or GraphQL, depending on which of our apps was calling. We'd use an HTML5 video tag as the player, and we would use WebVTT to contain the structure. For anyone not familiar, WebVTT stands for Web Video Text Tracks, is a widely adopted W3C standard for displaying time text in connection with the HTML5 track element. So it's a text-based format that contains structure information like video captions and subtitles or CD tracks. So this approach meant that we had no manifest to offer for public consumption, but we considered this just an iteration on our road to AAAF3. So rewind back in time to 1 month ago, and then suddenly we abruptly changed our minds and decided to go for it and produce AAAF Pres 3 manifest for our AV content. So what had happened was that we had defined our data model. We had 4 file set roles, access and preservation files, and then we also defined a couple supplementary or a couple additional roles. An auxiliary file set would be like image-based content. So it might be like a CD cover for an audio file. And supplemental content was generally text-based files that could, for example, be vendor-supplied content. So we also defined 3 work types: image, audio, and video, and made a decision that our image works would not contain AV content. So this meant that we could just leave our version 2 manifest in place for our images and continue to use our React viewer for our image type works, but potentially go a different route with audio and video. The prototype HTML5 player that we had built had really helped us start thinking this all through, and we felt much more confident forging ahead with V3. We were also excited to use a common spec rather than going our own way with an ad hoc spec we developed ourselves. And finally, we had a new team member, Matt Jordan, join our team, who really hit the ground running and greatly increased our team knowledge and capacity to do this work. So with that, I will turn it over to Matt.
Hi. Yeah, so right away we decided, or soon after my start, we decided that we would go with presentation 3 as a model. And one of the first things we needed to do after we did that was define our manifest. This would allow individuals on our team to work towards a common goal independently. And going this route, Adam and I could develop the client, the IIIF client, our AV player that renders our IIIF manifest, and Karen could develop the framework for the Pres 3 manifest generation based upon our work model. And so how did we do that? Well, designing the manifest, we followed a few key steps here. We read the presentation 3 specs, tried to understand manifests, canvases, annotations and their motivations, content resources within those annotations, and full disclosure, I've been sort of living in Pres 3 land for nearly a year, and I still learn new things all the time. There's a lot to learn out there. And one thing that really helps me is the IIIF cookbook that's available on the IIIF website and in GitHub, and the recipes there. These are like immensely helpful. For one, I believe it was either yesterday or the day before, folks at IU were talking about the IIIF React Media Player, and a lot of my inspiration has come from a recipe that sort of, I think, helped model both that player and this player. And it's been around since earlier this year, and it basically prescribes how one should construct a video or a sound manifest with a supplementing transcript. Following that recipe model, we built upon it, and we wanted to create our own mock manifests. And we sort of sandboxed these, and we just sort of tinkered with the JSON. It helped us understand the spec better and helped us visualize in a client, the IIIF viewer, how it might be rendered. And while we were doing that, we tested these mock manifests in viewers, specifically Mirador 3, and just tried to, before we could build our own viewer, we wanted to see how these manifests might exist in other viewers. And I'm going to hand it back to Karen to discuss how we generated these manifests now that we had a stable mock.
Yeah, so writing the manifest generation code for V3 was fairly quick. We already had most of the infrastructure in place for producing the V2 manifests. We did leverage the online presentation API validator tool quite a bit in trying to ensure that we were producing valid manifests. And then in terms of presentation API version, as I mentioned before, we had decided we're basically going to support both Pres 2 manifests and Pres 3. So we focused on architecting coexisting routes that would allow us to migrate our images to V3 at any point in the future, or to produce both types for images and let clients choose, and also to support other versions possibly in the future.
Okay, and back to the front end, we decided that we needed to sort of refine the problem. And what are we trying to do in the first place? Well, we're building a UI component that represents an AV work. We need this component or viewer to be AV first. We need this component to exist in multiple applications, meaning our Meadow, our repository, and in digital collections, so our front end. And we know that our works are complex and may contain multiple time-based file sets that range from video to sound. And then in addition, there might also be some auxiliary images associated with those AV file sets. And that those AV file sets might have corresponding textual content for captions, transcripts, subtitling, and maybe even chapters, structural data, etc. And finally, we are going to move forward with IIIF 3 presentation, or sorry, with the 3.0 presentation API as our model. And it allowed us to start development. So zoom forward a few weeks, and here we are. And I'm going to walk through how we brought this manifest to life and how sort of the anatomy of that manifest sort of maps to the different components in our UI or in our player. The first thing we do is we read the manifest items array, and we output all canvases to below that HTML5 video element. And by default, we are setting the first canvas as our active canvas. You sort of see right there in the JSON example, there's a duration and a label. And within those canvases, each of them have an annotation targeting the canvas ID with a motivation of painting. And within that annotation, there's a content resource, that's the body, with a type. And that type here is video. And for our app, we really care about any of these that are video, sound, or image types. Sound and video resources will have an ID that we directly feed to our HTML5 video source attribute in that HTML5 element. And we additionally could have a sound canvas in our manifest, and images. And these are our auxiliary images again, and this is an AV first player, and they're somehow related to the video or sound. And we don't expect this to be a kitchen sink viewer right now, or maybe even ever. So we're just going to render these in a minimal fashion, and deep zoom may come in a future release. Also included in our manifest may be annotations. Really, in Pres 3, almost everything is an annotation. But these annotations have the motivation of supplementing. And really what that means is that a client can optionally display them. In our AV manifest, these will carry a content resource for WebVTT. And we will feed these to our HTML5 video player as the optional tracks right there where the closed captioning button is in the video element. And we will also pull down that VTT, fetch it, and then parse its cues, and render them to the navigator component that's adjacent to the player. And just a note, to get this project off the ground, keep our manifest lightweight and easy for us to render, we are using WebVTT for structural textual data such as chapters as well as transcripts. There are benefits to perhaps shifting our structural data elsewhere in our manifest. However, for now, we're choosing to run them through the same vehicle as our transcript so that we don't have to build out additional functionality. Thanks for running through this with me. I'm happy to answer any additional questions that may come up, and I love to geek out about the Pres 3 API, and we'll talk with anyone who's willing. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Adam to talk about some of the tools we used and maybe give some final thoughts.
Yeah, so kind of at everything, I guess Karen and Matt have shown thus far, just kind of how we're moving from version 2 to 3. So one might ask, what special tooling or packages are we using in this code and developing like against the 3.0 spec currently? So not a whole lot, actually, but one package in particular that we've found kind of helpful and would like to share in case others are interested is something called the Hyperion IIIF framework. So it's a JavaScript package intended for UI apps to help interact with IIIF manifests and basically break down like a manifest, potentially complex structure into a more easily reasoned format. So the Hyperion project, it's quite ambitious, and in our experience so far, definitely not yet feature complete, but it's on its way there, and something that we might be excited to help contribute towards in the future. It's being led by Digerati's UI tech lead, Stephen Fraser, who does some really great IIIF front-end work. So how do we actually use Hyperion in our app? So we kind of use it to initially fetch a IIIF manifest. Hyperion then takes a snapshot of the manifest state, and it does a couple things with it. One, it stores this in a Redux store, which could be helpful down the road. Say if you had changing data state surrounding a IIIF manifest. So say you're like developing a IIIF manifest, like visual builder tool for a researcher to use, or something to make it a little bit easier to work with building these out. A data state container for manifest data could be super useful on the front end. But back to how we're, I guess, using it at the current time. So we feed Hyperion a manifest URL. And then we get back from Hyperion a flattened out, normalized version of the manifest data. So data in this shape can definitely be more easily used in our app, and saves hundreds, if not thousands of lines of validation code, protecting against maybe nulls or undefineds, depending on how much metadata we have represented in our manifest. So when using Hyperion, if you need to go like further or deeper and pull out like deeply nested manifest data, Hyperion provides this concept of, they call it a vault, where essentially you provide like an ID of the resource within the manifest that you need more data from, and then Hyperion gives you a flattened out version of that particular slice of data. So this may sound a bit confusing, just talking about without kind of seeing it in action. But after experimenting with the package, it definitely provides some nice patterns that Matt and I have found for extracting complex IIIF manifest data, and just makes it a little bit easier to write front-end code around that. And we think, IIIF JavaScript tools like this, especially ones like Hyperion, which ship with React bindings, are going to be highly influential in driving IIIF user interface development in the future. It just makes it easier. So final thoughts on kind of, I guess, where we're at. So again, this is pretty new for us. Most of the things that we've shown here have just happened in the past month. So it's a work in progress, but maybe that supports maybe our first final thought is, if anyone out there is considering the same, just start. When you're working with the spec and transitions and whatnot, it's totally okay to give yourself some room to experiment and, expect failure and know that that's okay. So say you're trying something new, call your code branch, throw me away. That's totally fine to just approach it from that perspective and give yourself the flexibility to, learn where things fall down, or discover use cases like we did that were probably impossible to predict before walking down the road a little bit. Sometimes you stumble through things and you learn, and then you revise, and you just keep it an iterative process. Another final thought, at least on the UI side of things, developing against a spec is really nice for the UI, and that's kind of what jump started I guess, our transition from version 2 to 3 was just thinking about the best way to create a particular reusable UI component. So when you build anything reusable, what comes along for the ride is your own API detailing how other code is going to use your thing. So, you know, we knew the IIIF data model could accurately capture what we were trying to do, or our data. And that's like building out some kind of viewer thing against the spec. That's just a whole lot of decisions, like naming conventions and labels and all the stuff that we don't have to make. We just get that for free from IIIF, which is awesome. And in fact, I mean, when we first started kind of playing around with this, you know, Matt and I kind of half jokingly threw out an idea that maybe just on the front end alone, if we were going to support 3.0 or version 3 of the spec, you know, maybe just on the fly, our front end code would just kind of create like a version 3 compliant manifest object that we could feed into this viewer thing just so we could build to a spec. And then again, if our team's building to a spec, then hopefully that's something we can eventually, you know, share back out to the community, or something that we can, you know, jump back into another community package, combine work, you know, now that we have our heads wrapped around working on this a little bit more. Maybe a third takeaway, you know, it seems as more and more repository systems start representing their works through IIIF and try to push the boundaries of a particular version of the spec and try it against like many different use cases. Ultimately, hopefully the presentation API from IIIF is going to become more resilient. So this will translate into an easier to use API for client front-end apps. And easy to use APIs really drives a broad, diverse, and creative body of UI implementations, which ultimately is going to benefit users. Us as developers, we can react more quickly to end users' ideas, their use cases, and ultimately, hopefully, meet their needs. So, yeah, I guess more info. Thanks to our other team members who have also, you know, been working hard on this with us, David, Brendan, and Michael. And if folks are interested in kind of like checking out what we're doing, again, it's a work in progress, but we're making headway. There's links to probably the 3 major repositories that you're going to see the code reflected on what we've been discussing today. And I think that's it. I don't know if there's any questions. Matt and Karen would be happy to answer.
Yes, and it looks like there are a couple questions in the Slack already. One, by normalized flat file, does that mean that it dereferences the links as well and puts it all into one file?
So normalization means, like, let's just say your manifest doesn't have a thumbnail associated with it, that the vault, Hyperion Vault will take that and store it in a Redux store as an object, but it will add sort of an empty thumbnail property. So that property will exist. And what that'll do is it'll limit the chances of your front end app trying to retrieve that manifest and that thumbnail not being there and it falling down. Instead, it'll just, you know, you can sort of write your code to be a little bit lighter so that you don't have to worry so much about whether those things are going to fall down.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, all the links should maintain their integrity, but I think it's for situations where you have like really maybe like thin metadata in your manifest. So say you only have like 2 fields like populated, you're going to get back something from Hyperion that could be like an object with all supported properties for whatever it's like the canvas or whatever part of the manifest it is. So you could have like an object with like 20 properties, even though you might only represent 2 in your particular manifest.
Okay, one more question, actually two-parter. Will this viewer be in Samvera Labs or otherwise done in a shareable way or custom to NU? And then when do you anticipate it being deployed production?
I guess we could all kind of answer that, but again, we're just kind of like working initial, like this viewer, we're initially just trying to work on it locally just to help kind of like prove out kind of our unique, I guess, like implementation or kind of to meet our very kind of specific like needs at the moment. But we're aware there's, you know, some awesome work going on in the community regarding like IIIF like players and stuff. So I think ultimately, maybe we see this like down the road, hopefully not too far off, being able to put, you know, our ideas, to share those with other similar kind of packages going on and maybe do some collaborative work and then kind of like shape that up a little bit. And then, yeah, hopefully it'd be nice to offer some kind of community package that a lot of people could get value from.
And I should say that the customizations for Northwestern right now is maybe limited to color. And all we need to do is then maybe extend it a way for someone to be able to configure a theme to adjust brand colors. Otherwise, it's pretty open. The only thing that the viewer expects is a valid Pres 3 manifest. And you know, it assumes that those manifests are going to be somewhat multi-canvas. Otherwise, that tray that's below the media player is going to be empty, and it also assumes it's going to be supplementing BTTs. Otherwise, that area that's adjacent to the media player is going to be empty as well.
I just wanted to add that it is deployed to production. We just do not have AV content in production yet, but that should be in a couple months.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions in Slack or the Q&A yet. Again, if you have any questions, you can post them either in the Zoom Q&A or in the Connect Slack channel. If it's in the Slack channel, prefaced with question colon. Okay, I don't see any questions coming across, but of course you can always ask the presenters after the fact. So we can go ahead and go to our break a little bit early now. We will resume from our break at 20 after the hour. Thank you again for joining. We look forward to more presentations at that time. Thank you again to participants that have joined today, especially ones where it may be getting into the evening and even night hours, depending on your time zone. We'll get started in just a minute here as folks rejoin after the break. I'll go ahead and stop sharing so Leanne can get set up there.
Are we ready to go?
Yes, let's go ahead.
Okay.
So next we have Leanne Bradford. We'll talk about how to set your developers up for success and grow your team in the process.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about, like you said, how to set up your developers for success and how to grow your team in the process. Notch 8, where I work, has a long-time strategy of hiring less experienced developers from unique backgrounds and successfully growing our developers for long-term success. We've been evolving our strategies over time, and this talk is about some of the strategies that we are using now. I'm Leanne Bradford, and I'm a senior software developer for Notch 8, and my pronouns are she, her. And I want to go in a little bit about why I am talking about this. So I am a career changer. My previous career was as a full-time mom, and I did that for a long time, more than 10 years. And when I was ready to re-enter the paid workforce, I chose to learn software development, and I went to a coding boot camp. And a part of that boot camp, I worked for 4 weeks as an intern, and my internship was with Notch 8. And at the end of my internship, I was offered a job, and I was absolutely thrilled with the chance to work as a full-time developer. When I started at Notch 8, we were a really small team. So there was 3 senior developers, and then there was me as far as our developer staff went. I was definitely the most junior as far as technical skills were concerned, but I was also the oldest person on the team. And I was in a really unique situation that allowed imposter syndrome to really blossom. So here I was, I had a lot of professional experience. I had a lot of volunteer and nonprofit experience, as well as a lot of life experience that I was bringing to the job, but I was starting in an entry-level role. I definitely had a lot of confidence issues, and it was compounded by the fact that working as a developer is really hard. So it's not the kind of job where you have a recipe that you're going to follow, or where you have 10 steps that if you perform in the exact same order, you're going to have success. You have to be part detective, you have to be part artist, and you have to be a puzzle solver. And with all of that, you also have to have technical skills. So for me, when I first started, I actually was caught up very much in the classic imposter syndrome cycle. Just to go briefly over what that cycle is, it's like you start off with excitement, and then you kind of leads into dread and worry and even panic. Then you do your work, you have success, then you're relieved, and then you start to focus on your failures or your shortcomings, and then you deny your own success. So I spent about the first year of my time at Notch 8 caught up in that cycle. I would wake up super excited about my job. I absolutely loved it. But on my commute into the office, I would start thinking, okay, today is the day they're going to figure out I'm a total fraud and they're going to fire me. I just felt that way every morning. And I'd go into work and I would just focus on getting through one task at a time. And at the end of the day, I'd be like, wow, I did it. I'm actually programming. This is the greatest thing in the world. And I think, I must be doing something right. I made it through another day. And then on my drive home, I start to doubt my success. I would focus on my mistakes, and I'd start to doubt my success, and then that cycle would continue. So unfortunately, I really suffered through that in silence, and it was totally unnecessary. I was afraid to mention how I was feeling because I thought that I was going to lose the job that I loved. But my teammates were really, really understanding, and they always supported me, and they were there to help me as much as I needed it. So I think if you ask anyone who works for Notch 8, they're going to tell you the same thing, that our company culture and our team support is the best part of our jobs. So I was able to learn and grow in a really supportive environment. And I was determined that as we added new developers to our team, I wanted to do as much as I could to help them avoid some of the same issues that I had when I was first starting. And that's why I've taken a special interest in this topic. So today I'm going to share a little bit about what I learned from my experience and how I think that two big parts of our company culture have helped to successfully grow our developers and set them up for success. I'm going to mention some of the ideas from our team that help to grow our talent and to retain our team members. So you might find that these things aren't going to work for you in your environment, but maybe they'll spark some ideas that you can share with your team. And maybe you can take away some of the key parts of our company culture that will allow you to come up with your own ideas. So I'm going to start with attracting and hiring talent, talk about some of our specific success strategies that we are using. I'm going to talk about our mentorship culture, a little bit about the responsibilities and things of mentors and mentees, and then I'm going to talk about job autonomy. So attracting talent. Recent US labor statistics show major concerns about the talent shortage. By the end of 2020, there's 1.4 million unfilled tech jobs. Meanwhile, the number of computer science graduates is only 400,000 per year. So you can see there's a huge gap there. Companies are really going to need to continue to struggle with staffing if this software developer shortage keeps growing at the same pace. It's really important to attract talent and to keep your talent because the gap between the tech talent supply and demand is growing. And trying to fill senior roles is actually even more difficult. So Notch 8 got really creative when trying to find new developers. They were experiencing this problem years ago, and they were noticing that similar companies were going through the same problems. If you didn't know it already, our founders opened up a coding bootcamp about 7 years ago, and that opened up opportunities for many people from non-traditional backgrounds to get the training they needed to start a job in software development. But more importantly, it gave Notch 8 a great talent pool to recruit from. So this was able to solve the first step of the talent problem for Notch 8. But once you have hired your new developers, there's the challenge of leveling up their tech skills. And then once you level up the tech skills, keeping them so they don't jump ship and go somewhere else. So tenure for software developers at small companies is only 1.5 years. So I'm going to quickly go over some of our particular strategies that have helped us grow our developers. They may or may not work in your specific setting, right? But it might give you some ideas for some of the things that we're doing to help grow our developers and to keep them engaged and keep them excited about staying at Notch 8. So first off, we do one-on-ones. And you might think, well, that's a pretty common thing. Managers do one-on-ones with their team all the time. But in our case, we've expanded it to do peer-to-peer one-on-ones. Developers, when they're at the same level or near the same level, they can really share their struggles with each other. They have good perspective that the more senior folks might not have, that they might have forgotten about. It helps with our team chemistry. So especially in our remote work environment that we're all going through right now, we've always been a remote-friendly company, and it really helped us transition into remote work for everyone, but there's still a bit of distance, and that's hard to overcome because you're not able to maybe chat at the water cooler or have lunch together in the lunch area. So this is one small way that we have that helps with this. We also have mentor-mentee one-on-ones. This gives an opportunity for our junior developers to have one-on-ones on a monthly basis with the more experienced developer that isn't their manager. So there's a little bit of trust that you have with that. Again, it helps as well with our team chemistry. It's part of our mentorship culture. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about that in a few minutes. And finally, we have our manager developer one-on-ones. And this helps our developers talk about any issues that are coming up, and it allows us to address any issues before they become big problems. Because the managers they're going to see patterns. And if they see those patterns, then we can address it. In addition to one-on-ones, we have daily office hours. All of our senior developers have an hour each week that we devote to helping out anyone on the team that needs it. So we have a Zoom room set up, and if you need help, or sometimes if you just want to drop in and say hi, you can do that, and you just drop in on the meeting. This is really especially helpful for fresh perspectives on the team. A lot of times someone might be stuck and their project lead isn't available, and they can just drop in and ask for help. And that not only keeps the developers moving forward, it also gets our senior developers familiar with projects that they aren't scheduled to normally work on. We're even thinking about possibly expanding the office hours to other developers, so that developers that aren't senior developers, like a mid-level developer, might be able to expand their skill set as well. So another thing that we have, we've always had weekly learn time, and we've been expanding on it a little bit. So Notch 8's always had about up to 8 hours each week that we're allowed to, that's part of our schedules that we're dedicating to learning. Sometimes we might be using up some of this learn time to do non-billable tasks like upgrading our computers or installing new software, but the bulk of that time is really to be used to learn about new technologies and things that we might be interested in learning about. But recently we've started a weekly workshop for the team as part of that to make it a more formal experience. So every week a team member can volunteer to teach the rest of the team about new technologies or any skills that they might want to share. So for example, we've had workshops on Kubernetes, Hotwire, and we also do career focused workshops and have things like how to write your own bio. This has been a great way to level up our whole team on new topics and to address things that maybe the whole team might be struggling with. But it really gives all of our developers a chance to level up their skills. So there's really no better way to learn about something than to teach it to others. And that's been really successful for us. I'm going to talk now about our mentorship culture. So you might be thinking, hey, all those ideas are really nice, but there's no way my organization is going to agree to do some of those things. And that might be true, but the key concept behind these strategies is one of our core company values, and that's we strive to have a mentorship culture. And I want to talk about what does that mean to have a mentorship culture? It doesn't mean just starting up a formal mentorship program, assigning mentors and mentees, and then saying, okay, off you go do the mentoring, because that's not going to work. So for us, it's a mentorship mindset that we try to have to be included as part of everything we do. So being a mentor at Notch 8 starts on day one. When juniors first start, their primary focus is really going to be on themselves and just getting their tech skills leveled up. I mean, let's face it, jumping into Sanvera, it's really daunting when you're new. But we also find that we can put our junior developers in a position to mentor others. So formally, this might be in mentoring an intern. So we do have interns several times a year, and we find that our more junior members of our team are much better at mentoring the interns, and they do a lot better job at it than our senior developers do. And they just can relate better to them. They're closer to the struggles and understanding being in the same position. Another informal way that our junior developers might find themselves mentoring can be teaching one of our Friday Learn sessions. So like I said before, there's no better way to learn something than to teach it to others. And we just expect mentorship out of everyone on the team, not just the senior folks. We also have a culture of open communication. So we welcome open communication without judgment. Notch 8 strives to be a safe space for everyone at every level to share their ideas as well as their struggles. So chances are, if one of us is feeling something such as burnout, for example, there's probably a lot of other people on the team that are feeling the same way. And we like to keep that communication open so that we can problem solve around things that come up like that. Also, a part of our mentorship culture that's important is that it drives innovation. So it's because we have that culture that continuously promotes collaboration, and that collaboration can lead to innovation solutions to problems that pop up. For all of the things I mentioned on the previous screen, those were innovations that were brought up from our team. So from interns to apprentices, all the way up to our senior developers, if we have an idea, we're encouraged to pursue it. The innovation on our team is not limited to management. Our mentorship culture really helps encourage all of us to explore our ideas. It helps us to set personal and career goals, and it helps us to be accountable and to stay on track to achieve our goals. So everyone on our team has the power to bring their ideas in front of the whole team, where we can discuss them and we can decide if we want to implement and try them out. Having the mentorship culture really, I believe, increases our developer promotion and our retention. So while we have some developers that leave closer to that 1.5 year mark, most of our team stays much longer. And most of us started as interns, apprentice, or junior developers and worked our way up to mid-level and now senior level positions. I'm going to talk a little bit about mentorship, kind of aside from that. There's many different types of mentorship. There's like informal mentorship, and then there's formal mentorship. So at Notch 8, we really don't have a structured mentorship program aside from our internships and our assigned one-on-ones. We don't have like a formal program that we follow specific steps. But your organization may or may not have mentorship as well, a program as well. But you can be a successful mentor or mentee with anyone. I also want to point out that even if you don't want to be a mentor, you probably already are one. You might be setting an example as an unconscious mentor. Whether you like it or not, you're having an impact on other people. So I know, for example, when I'm pair programming, if we are working on a specific task and I'm not enjoying it, I tend to complain. It's really easy for me to complain about it. And that's unconscious mentorship in action, right? We all need to be conscious at all times that all of our actions are having a positive or even a negative influence. Another way you're mentoring is with informal mentorship. This might be times in your social network, at home with your family. It might be your presence on social media. So you really want to be aware of this, and you want to shift your focus from being a conscious mentor. Being a conscious mentor is when you set out to teach others, you set a good example, and you're there for others during significant events. I want to talk a little bit about being a mentee as well. If you don't have a formal mentor, you can find mentorship in a lot of places. Like you can find it in books, you can find it in motivational speakers, you can watch videos on YouTube, you can even find mentorship in art, in music, or in movies. So mentorship is out there for you to find it. But I would recommend you find someone that you want to emulate. Like you really want to find somebody whose career you want to follow, and you want to find someone who shares your values. If you're lucky enough to have a formal mentor, it's your responsibility to do your homework, to hold yourself accountable. That relationship has to be reciprocal or it's not going to work. So mentees should remain curious. They need to remain open, and they have to have a beginner's mindset. Even if you're not a beginner, you just have to keep your mind open. I think a good way I've heard of the mentor-mentee relationships described would be like a person playing fetch with a dog. The mentor has the ball, they throw it, and the ball is like the idea to go out and try. And the mentee is going to go chase after it. And then they retrieve the idea and work with it. They're going to bring it back to you. They're going to bring it back to the mentor. And that cycle is going to start over again. It's also important that every person has a slightly different way of working, and depending on our skills, our experience, even our personal preferences. So we all need to be really flexible. Mentors should strike the right balance of giving mentees time and freedom to work towards their goals as they see fit, and they want to be available at any time to provide support and advice. All right, so back to Notch 8 and how we level up our technical skills. So as far as technical guidance, it's best to kind of start small and gradually increase an individual's responsibilities and freedom as they develop their capabilities. So say we have a newly hired developer and they've decided, hey, I only want to do front-end tickets. I only want to do front-end development. It's all I'm comfortable with, and that's all I can do. So fine, we're going to do that. We're going to give them all front-end tickets to start, but we're going to gradually ease them out of their comfort zone. So we might do like introduce new tickets that are out of their comfort zone, but keep them tightly scoped. So those tickets might have step-by-step instructions on how to complete a task. For example, it might say, create a file, give it this name, put it in this location, put this code block in that file, write a test to make sure that that works. And then maybe even link to other pull requests or link to other projects where that feature might be implemented. So it's really have tight guidance for them when they first start out. But as they get more experience, our implementation instructions are going to get a little looser. So they're going to possibly say something like, Google this search term, and that's going to get you on the right path. So technically, we know for a developer to grow, they really need to learn from their mistakes and their successes. So in the beginning, we're going to give them more specific instructions to build confidence, and then we're going to slowly give less specific instructions so that they can learn for themselves. And finally, I'm going to talk about job autonomy. So another huge part of our Notch 8 culture that helps to level up our developers is our focus on job autonomy. So what does that mean? It means that we have more freedom to decide when, where, and how we do our work. So there's studies out there that show employees who experience more autonomy are more motivated, creative, and they're more satisfied with their jobs. So some organizations might consider autonomy just working hours and working location. And that's part of what we have. We work remote and we have to be available during core times in the day, but for the most part, we can work whenever we want. And we also encourage each one of us to manage our own career paths. So even though we have some things, and even then, we have some say in actually the company's strategic direction. So we have a lot more autonomy that you might have at other institutions or companies. So for an example, a few years back, I noticed that we had a lack of diversity in our hiring process in our candidates. And I brought it up in a one-on-one with my manager, and I was encouraged to do some research on how we can get a more diverse set of candidates and for our job openings. So I, grabbed that ball and ran with it. I did some research. I gave a presentation in a company meeting to the whole team, and the whole team agreed that, yeah, let's make some changes. So I'm proud to say now, and we're a much more diverse group than we were just a few years ago. And when we're hiring now, we're going to keep our interviews open until we have underrepresented candidates as finalists. And it's been really successful for us. So there are some studies out there that show that people with more job autonomy might be less honest about their work. So at Notch 8, we really want to hire self-starters and problem solvers. When we're hiring, we don't spend a lot of time in our interview process. We don't spend any time in our interview process with algorithm challenges. We know we can teach people to code. We've done it time and time again. But we can't always teach them to be hard workers. So we like to hire people that we have to tell to stop working rather than people that aren't as motivated. To keep our developers on track for leveling up their skills, we've created a career ladder with detailed job descriptions for all of our positions. So a career ladder is a guide that helps you navigate through all the different positions at our company. We've categorized our skills that we want our developers to have. So it might be technology skills, might be mentorship skills, even to community engagement. So our career ladder provides a roadmap for each of us to follow as we grow in our careers. And while that ladder is pretty specific, it really allows for leeway in how each of us decides to fulfill those requirements. So for community engagement, for example, one of us could do things like give a talk at Samvera Connect or another conference, right? But other people who are more introverted and don't want to do public speaking, they might choose to write blog posts or choose to be active on social media. So it's really up to us how to decide what works best for our skills and our personality on how we're meeting those requirements. Our career ladder has really helped us all to know what skills gaps we have. It allows us to reflect on our skills and on our goals, and it gives us benchmarks for when we can monitor our progress. So we also know it's really important for us to measure ourselves against our own benchmarks. We don't want to be comparing ourselves to other people on the team because we all have our strengths and our weaknesses and our pattern of growth. All right, so to review, in my experience, the culture of mentorship combined with our job autonomy are they not only help our developers level up, but it also creates happiness and engagement. It makes us all more accountable, and therefore we want to perform at our best. It helps us employees feel more valued, and it motivates us to learn new skills. And it leads to greater productivity and a greater sense of team and organizational culture. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Leanne. There's lots of love in the Slack channel, as well as some questions already in there. So there's 3 or 4 questions here. So I'll skip mine to give others preference here. Can you share some of the changes you made to attract a more diverse pool, maybe in the Slack channel?
Oh, okay, that's a great question. Well, we were just kind of, like I said, we have a secret talent pool of bootcamp grads, basically in our sister company. And we were getting recommendations from them, and they weren't diverse. So we basically said, give us people. We know there's a lot of diversity in the bootcamp. So provide us not just with the traditional candidates. So we just asked for it. Other things we've done is like we've been more involved, like we went to meetups, I would say. So say we went to meetups where people were doing algorithm practice. And for example, it's a perfect example. We had one of our team members was at that meetup. She went up and she was sharing some of her work, and we noticed, wow, that's somebody we want to hire. We weren't even hiring. We made a position for her. We like snuck in, hey, we have a quick job. Can you do this? And basically it was her coding challenge. We gave her paid work as a contractor, and then she submitted it, and then we hired her. And so when we find people, we make room for them. But we went to not just our typical talent pool, but we went out and tried to engage in outside of our typical network.
Great. Now I was flagged. I missed one question up above, so I think I found it. Did all these processes come out of team retros or some other way? What mechanism do you use for iterating on them?
That's a great question too. So we do have a weekly company meeting, and each week, and we have open discussion on those. And a lot of our ideas of things that we implemented, that I gave specific strategies, were part of a retreat. We did a company retreat, and we had everyone on the team answer questions and give suggestions. And a lot of those ideas they all come from within our team.
Great. Then the next one, is this career ladder public? If so, where is it? If not, can I have it still?
I don't think it's open source. I don't see any problem with us. I would have to ask permission, but absolutely, I'd be happy to share with it. And there are a lot of career ladders out there that are open source. And if you do your research, you'll find that a lot of items on our ladder are borrowed from other companies. And we basically had some idea of the areas that we wanted to focus that were important to us. And then we went out and did research and found some of those recommendations. So, but I'm happy to share with anyone who asks. I'll follow up in the Slack and share our career ladder.
Okay, similarly, does the career ladder also include pay raises?
Yes. And I know as part of Notch 8, we have our salaries are tied to our career ladder. So there's a salary range tied to your position. And the whole career ladder was part of the diversity and initiative that I started a few years back, that it wasn't just hiring diverse people, it was keeping them. So part of that was to have a career ladder and have the salaries tied to it, so that we know we can be honest with ourselves of what level we're at, and then we can be paid accordingly. And I think that's really helped with our retention.
Great. The next question, do the senior junior titles add to the problems of people joining teams? I would have thought joining a team of 3 senior developers as a junior would be tough for most.
Well, I mean, I was lucky. I had 3 strongly skilled people to lean on. We try now to maybe have 2 or 3. Sorry, I just saw I'm okay to share the career letter. We just have maybe 2 or 3 junior developers or mid-level to a senior. So it's kind of lopsided. It was intimidating, but I was so excited to have that, to get that first position, that I just never wanted to do it, lose it. And I also brought skills to the team that was lacking. So one of the nice thing, I was kind of hired more as a front-end developer, and the 3 senior developers they were all not very good at all at front-end development. So I was a good fit. Is a little less intimidating that way.
And I see one other question. How big is your team? Is this a company-wide set of processes? And if so, how big is the company? And Rob answered that our team is 18 people. It's pretty guerrilla. And the follow-up question was, what's the senior, mid-level, junior split? So this was the last question. That's open.
Yep. Okay. I think we have, sorry about the dogs if you hear them. I think the mailman's here. 5 senior developers, and I'm not sure the mid-level junior breakup is between the rest on the team.
Okay, then there's one more question in the chat at the moment. Do you have documentation with cheat sheets and facts for developers?
We do. We have that is a good question. We have a like playbook, I believe we're calling it, but we have a website where we post guidance. We have recordings from our Friday sessions. But any kind of tips or tricks we post in our on our website, where we can all search and look it up.
Okay, and I think that covers all the questions so far in the chat. Leanne, I definitely encourage you to look at it, since there's lots of messages directed your way, not necessarily questions. So let's go ahead and transition to the next session. So we have working interest groups. Maria Whitaker is up for the next presentation. So Maria, if you are here and able to share, go right ahead. And we can see your slides, but we can't hear you at the moment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you go. There you go.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Maria Whitaker with Indiana University, and I'm going to present on a proposed Samvera working group, the developer onboarding working group. So the last question that Leanna addressed, it was very interesting, because we're interested in figuring out best ways to onboard developers. The motivation for this was mostly my talking to people, because as a manager of developers in the Samvera community, it has been a challenge for us to onboard developers with no prior training on Samvera, and sometimes not even on Rails. And there haven't really been training camps lately. So it's been an issue over the years to onboard new developers. So the goal of the working group will be to create a body of resources to help Samvera development teams to onboard developers. And the activities that I list in here are activities mostly for things that came up in conversations, but the working group can actually start with new activities or think of other options for how to address this. But what is currently in the proposal is, number one, and I think this is the most important of them, to create a curriculum to guide the learning process. Oftentimes, the problem is developers get overwhelmed with how much they need to learn and where do I start. And so creating a curriculum would be, I think, a very important step for the working group. And also, we wanted to have people share the strategies that they have used that helped onboard developers, and creating an inventory of resources that are currently available. We know that there is a lot of resources out there, but they're just not together on a page directed at onboarding developers. So you need to know that things are out there and how to search for them. So creating this inventory could be very helpful. Updating architecture diagrams, documenting important things about the code, collecting links to external sources that people have tried, blogs they have read, tutorials they've tried that they think are helpful, documenting tips from experienced developers. All these are good ideas. I was very interested in the proposal for code components because that might help create some of these guides to developers. So, but any other suggestions that can be of help to onboarding developers can be part of this process. And so my next slide, not getting my next slide here, sorry. So the deliverables for this working group will be online documentation and resources to facilitate onboarding developers, but also a proposal on how to maintain this information current. Oftentimes we have this great documentation that we finished and it's perfect, and then a few months later, maybe a year later, is obsolete. So part of the deliverables would be figuring out a way to maintain this information current. Originally, we had this timeline to complete by the end of 2021. I'm not sure that this will happen, but once we have volunteers, they can determine what they believe is feasible. When I put the draft for this working group together, I was volunteering to be the facilitator, but as some of you know, I'm leaving the Samvera community, and so my name is no longer there, but there's a link there for you to join. The slides are available. There is a link there, and it's in the Samvera wiki, the proposal for the working group. And that's all I have. If anyone has any questions that might be helpful to answer.
Thank you, Maria. I don't see any questions in the Slack channel or the Q&A yet. Again, if you have any questions, you can post them directly to the Zoom Q&A or in the Connect Slack.
I'll put the link to the draft on Slack also, so people can volunteer. We're looking for volunteers.
Okay, I don't see any questions yet. And of course, you can post them to the Slack if they come up. So we can go ahead and transition to the next session. We have lightning talks up next. And we have Thomas Schurz and Heather Greer Klein lined up for those. And I think Thomas is up first, but of course you can work out a different order if that works better for you, Thomas and Heather.
Hey there, I don't mind going first. Heather, is that okay?
Go for it.
All right,
All
fantastic.
right, thank you, Thomas.
All right. Let me go ahead and share my desktop here. Be patient with me. I have a security preference thing here. Maybe we, Heather, would you mind going first as I deal with my Zoom security settings here?
Not at all.
All right, thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries. Happy to help. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Greer Klein. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Sanvera community manager. I'm the first full-time manager for the Sanvera community and have been in the role for about a year. And when I presented as part of my interview in August of 2020, I was asked to share my vision for the impact that I'd like to have on the Sanvera community after a year in the role. So I wanted to revisit that presentation and revisit those goals with all of you and share my thoughts going into my second year in this role. So last year, I asked everyone to imagine that we were together in person at Samvera Connect 2021. And while that didn't exactly happen, I also asked, what would it feel like after a year with a community manager? What tangible things will exist that didn't exist in 2020, and what possibilities would be available to us because of the work that we would have done over the past year? So this is how I summed up my vision for that first year. The picture there is a printout that I've had on my wall for the last year as a reminder of the vision that I put forth. And I was then, as now, aware that my position is a big investment by the Sanvera partners. So I'm really committed to ensuring that investment pays off and that having someone for whom Sanvera community activity is their only job will make a significant and lasting difference. So I imagined this past year as setting a foundation of support for future community-driven initiatives. So I used the framework of host leadership to talk about my approach to community management and what I wanted to do as my first steps in the role. So I'll drop some host leadership resources in the Slack chat later. I probably will do a longer presentation on it someday because I use host leadership as the framework to guide all of my work. The first host leader tools I use are called noticing and initiating. So noticing in practice in community work means being genuinely curious and open to emergent change, looking for if something is missing, if something is over or underutilized, is there an opportunity to course correct or rethink different approaches? And it means being alert to things that work well, even really small things, and finding out how they happened and how to do more of them. And initiating is about bringing forth what you notice, identifying feasible next steps for action, implementing those steps or suggesting those steps, and then responding to what happens next. And my first steps were focused on transition work and structure. So things like moving to our own wiki and developing a communication model. I also initiated a lot of conversations, attended a lot of community meetings, and helped make a lot of connections between the work of different groups and between different people doing similar work. So in the next year, I really want to deepen my understanding of our technologies. And specifically, I want to learn more about the tools that we use for communication and information sharing in development work so that I can get better at noticing what is needed there and what is working well. And I want to keep holding energy for the great ideas that I hear in this community, like the core code approach that's starting to form for Hyrax. Often it's a matter of finding a path and a first step to move something forward and help to get others involved. And it also means making sure that I'm not leading every initiative, but rather that I'm helping to kick things off and then stepping back and offering support. So for example, I'm really excited to be on this onboarding working group and helping with it, but I do not want to chair it. So next up is inviting others into shared efforts. So thinking invitationally is about reaching out and engaging in a way which invites rather than insists that others join us, whether it's to join us for an event or join us in working towards a common goal. And a no to an invitation shouldn't damage a relationship and is really an opportunity to strengthen it. It's always an option to ask how the invitation could be made more attractive, or to explore if the timing is way off, if the right people haven't been invited, and so forth. So resourcing and communicating needs was my focus here, and it's a place where I feel like I really have made an impact in helping to clarify what community needs are and creating some light processes to communicate them and doing a lot of inviting of others to help. And looking ahead, I'm committed to making sure that meetings and activities in the community are a useful investment of time, that they contribute to our forward momentum, and that way it's always an easy invitation to accept because you know it'll be meaningful. And I want to look ahead as well to ensure that our potential future volunteer leaders are getting the experience and the support that they need so that they'll feel ready when we need to invite them to greater responsibility, so that we don't rest too much work on too few shoulders. Connecting and welcoming, this is critical in my role. I especially love this part. Sanvera has always been very welcoming of me, and I love helping to keep that welcome going. And I saw my first steps in this area as more cross-coordination and easing community onboarding. I think cross-coordination has been an ineffable but quite impactful way that I've contributed. And it's a great example of the effect of having a full-time coordinator who's just dedicated to Samvera. So as I have reminded folks on the board many times, you all have entire other jobs, but paying attention to these things is my job. In the next year, I'll be focusing on maintaining the paths that are working well to welcome and connect community members, and building the new ones as needed to make sure everyone can find a way in, and also that everyone can find a way to grow in the community. And finally, host leadership uses the term dynamic planning. It's for the approach of holding two different elements in mind. So focusing on your future intention or hope or goal for something, but also having flexibility over exactly what steps might be required to make progress to that goal. So even big changes or initiatives are really a series of small steps, and this requires reflecting and reviewing often and looking for progress and then deciding what the next step would be. So dynamic planning continues to be the foundation of my work. It's served me well, and it's something that I am trying to get better at all the time. So to end, I hope that I can give you another update next year in person. And I'm really looking forward to what we can do together in the meantime. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Heather. And I don't see any questions at the moment, so maybe we should move to Thomas next.
All right, let's try this again. Let's see if I can screen share. There we go. That looks better. Okay. So I want to do a quick lightning talk. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Thomas Schurz. I'm a software developer at the University of Cincinnati. We have a Hyrax application called Scholar at UC, and it has been around for a while. It is a self-deposit institutional repository for our research and our faculty members to deposit directly their intellectual output directly into our repository. And since we've been up for a long time, we've started to notice some cultural changes that have happened around our campus that have kind of affected our little digital repository. And the first one is here at our campus, unlike a lot of other campuses, we don't have a very agile deploy to production option. Everything here at UC has to go through change management. So we have a central change management system, or CAB, an advisory board, that anytime we want to deploy any application into production or update any of our production applications, there's a series of steps we have to go through. And I think Glenn Horton and I have talked a little bit about this. The idea is that we must put in submit a request. It must be approved by the CAB. It also must have a passing security scan, a documented testing strategy, and a documented backout plan. So as you see, there's a lot of heavy lifting here at UC to get any changes made. And so that started to affect our Scholar application, mainly the security scan piece. We weren't capable of doing the security scans ourselves. We have to put in a request to our InfoSec team. They then run a Rapid7 software to check and make sure that we don't have any medium vulnerabilities. This process can be time cumbersome. It can delay our deploys, and it's really hard to plan for the results you get. So what I wanted to do today was share some of these cultural things that are happening, talk about the problems that the problems it gives us with Scholar, and then just share a couple of quick utilities or gems that made it possible for us to deal with this change. And so for our security concerns, we found a gem called Brakeman. And Brakeman allows us to do a security vulnerability scan in our own local development environments. It allows us to do a security scan of our Docker environments and ultimately directly built into our CI for our Circle CI. So as we deploy through QA, we develop locally, we are always able to run Brakeman so that we don't have any more necessarily security surprises. So this was one approach that we used in dealing with this heavy-handed or difficult security scanning change management process. As we moved some of the responsibility up to the developers by allowing them to use the Brakeman gem to find security vulnerabilities before we had to submit to change management. And this has helped quite a bit. And so this shift of responsibilities has helped us deal with the security scan sooner, faster, no surprises and vulnerabilities, and helped us manage the change management process or change management culture that's here at UC. I'm going to speak fast. This is a lightning talk, right? So we're going to go quickly here. The second cultural adjustment that has happened is a commitment to AWS around here. And so that commitment is because we have very small sysadmins and DevOps teams here, and they are pushing towards using AWS for more hosting of applications, but our Scholar application is still a university hosted application. It is not part of the cloud. So we had to make sure this created a problem for us and that our DevOps wasn't able to properly monitor our application because they prefer to use a lot of the AWS tools for monitoring both applications and systems. And so we also sometimes have very limited command line access. This causes problems, and it causes problems in scanning logs and troubleshooting and things like that. And so we found 2 AWS utilities and gems that we were able to, or agents that we were quickly able to install on our servers that allow us to integrate our Scholar at UC application into the Amazon interfaces that our DevOps are more familiar with. And so the first one is the CloudWatch agent, and this is more for the system and services. This allows you to set monitoring of resources and all the things that DevOps like to keep an eye on for our Hyrax application that isn't necessarily part of the cloud. The second one is the Aws X-Ray, and this is more an application or developer focused utility that instead of having to scan logs, and we all know, I'm sure we all have a crazy grep command that we use for digging through our logs and trying to find different warnings and errors. Aws X-Ray allows you to have a more menu or organized approach to your applications. We're able to quickly look at status codes and any kind of the gets and puts and patches and posts. We're able to see all of the interactions that go on with our application through X-Ray. One, again, this lets our DevOps have a more central place to look at Scholar side by side with the other AWS applications that they are responsible for. Two, it lets us developers quickly have have a more organized tool for debugging some of the problems. And 3, there is this overall goal of quality control, right? You know, if we don't all look at the logs as often as we should, you know, but we do check in with X-Ray here, we can quickly see if there were any 500 errors, 302s, or any problems that may happen that we didn't necessarily know about or that weren't reported by other users. So we've decided to embrace some of this AWS culture using the CloudWatch agent and the X-Ray gem to let Scholar be a part of that monitoring. And so that's the second cultural element that we had to adjust to. And the third one is the idea that, you know, I think we all deal with this as Dependabot started to put PRs into our repos. We had to decide, you know, how secure do we want to be, right? You know, this idea of cutting edge or bleeding edge versus state of the art. You know, how committed are we to keeping everything current? And so here at UC, there is this culture that we try to stay as current as possible. But again, with our very small development team, that puts a lot of burden on us to verify and test all the latest gem updates on somebody else's timeline, that being Dependabots. And so we decided to turn off that feature and take a more hands-on approach to it using the bundler audit gem. And then that way we, as again, developers, can run, you know, these utilities in our local development environment, get a sense of some of the things that are coming down the pathway that are going to need to be updated, and choose to use a issue creation strategy for those. So these 3 main cultures that have kind of infiltrated our small development team have created a few problems, and we were lucky enough to be able to find some neat utilities and gems that helped us navigate those difficulties. So again, our change management culture is very strict with high levels of security, and we chose to use Brakeman to help support that. Our DevOps and sysadmins prefer to use an AWS kind of dashboard approach. So we turn to X-Ray and CloudWatch to help assist with that. And then this idea of staying current as best as we can, but yet still manageable by us developers. We've chose to turn off a lot of the Dependabot PRs and have moved to a more as needed bundler audit approach and create new issues around what we learn with bundler audit. So just trying to balance that control between developers and the culture that is happening here, and how to, you know, work with a small team and still keep an enterprise application up and current while we're still adjusting to these cultures. And so that is kind of my presentation about where we're at UC and how we're keeping our Scholar application relevant and manageable, secured, and audited. I also want to take a quick moment here at the end that I know we have a lot of working groups and we don't talk a lot about security. I've given a few talks on it. We don't talk about a lot of accessibility. And I am, if we were meeting in person, I would get to huddle together. But if there's anybody that's interested in talking more about how we secure our Hyrax applications, I'm always available in Slack to talk more about these things. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Thomas, and Heather as well, of course. I don't see any questions in the Slack, just some good follow-up comments so far. And again, you can post questions either the Zoom Q&A or in the Connect channel. We have about a minute or so before our break here.
All right. Well, thank you, Rick. Everybody, enjoy your break.
Yes, thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Heather, as well. And so we will have a break now for about 10 minutes until 30 past the hour. Thanks so much. All right, welcome back from the break. I will stop sharing so the presenters can get up and we'll get going in just a moment here.
Hi, everyone. We have a pre-recorded presentation here since not all of our presenters could be here at this time. So I need to make sure that audio is on when I share. Okay, here we go. Hello, I'm Anna Headley. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a digital infrastructure developer at the Princeton University Library.
Hi, I'm Elliot Jordan. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a geospatial developer at Princeton University Library.
Hi, I'm Tanya. I am a class of 2023 majoring in computer science at Princeton, and I work as a part-time software developer for the Princeton University Library.
Hi, my name is Andrew Gardner, he, him pronouns. I am a part-time software developer for the library and a student in the class of 24.
And today we are going to share what we're doing at Princeton with integrating undergraduate students onto our development team. We'll talk about how we got this program started, how we're doing training, what mentorship and onboarding look like, and what we've learned so far. First, I'll talk about how the program was started. In 2019, a change in federal policy made it very difficult for international students to get the visas that they needed for the summer internships they had lined up. And departments around the university were asked to consider whether we could create positions for these students, since they would be able to work for Princeton under their student visas. So we quickly wrote a job description and held interviews. We were able to hire one student, but due to shifting circumstances, she started in the fall and worked with us during the academic year. This experience motivated us to design a more intentional program to provide development mentorship to undergraduates at our institution. So Elliot and I, along with Trey Pendragon, got approval to hire some undergraduates onto our team to work full-time during the summer and then part-time during the academic year. In 2020, we went through interviewing and had just extended offers to 2 undergraduates when, due to the pandemic, we were directed to cancel the student positions for the summer. In 2021, we successfully hired 3 people and they've now been working with us for 4 months. So Elliot will describe the hiring process that we followed.
Thanks, Anna. Next slide, please. So as Anna mentioned, we already had an existing job description, but this year we rewrote it to update in-person and remote work requirements, obviously because of COVID. But also we wanted to make sure that our job description was aligned with a new evaluation rubric that we created, and which I will talk about more in a minute. So once our job description was solidified, we needed to find a way to advertise the position to students. So we posted the job to the student employment website. Also, we asked the engineering department's undergraduate affairs administrator to advertise it via their listserv. And I think it was a pretty successful strategy. We received a total of 15 applications, and we interviewed 6 of those for the position. So our team has been through this hiring process 3 times now and has developed a set of interview practices that really work best for us. So the first of which is our evaluation rubric. So after each interview, we individually score the candidate from 1 to 5 in a range of categories. Then at the end, the scores are totaled and they inform our final decision. So these are the rubric assessment categories. We evaluate each candidate on problem-solving ability, code craft. These are things like organization, readability, testing, variable names, comments, things like that. Communication skills. These are really crucial to life on a mostly remote team like ours. The ability to work independently, and also the ability to work collaboratively on a team. How curious and learning oriented the students are, and how much experience they have with our existing technology stack. And this is really to inform how much additional training will be required. And at the end, we have a category for bonus points. So that's anything not covered in the other categories that we want to add in there. So through the years that we've been doing this, one of the other interview practices that has been beneficial is the code sample. So we ask students to submit an example of their work along with the application. We each review the sample before the interview. And then during the interview, we spend about 15 minutes or so asking questions about the code. And we find this as a really good way to assess technical ability and communication skills. So I'd like to briefly touch on the interview process itself. So after an initial screening process, we identify candidates to bring in for an hour-long interview. And this is the interview agenda that we follow. And it seemed to work really well. We start with 5 minutes for introductions. Then we talk about the position for 5 minutes. And then each of the interviewers, us, prepares a set of general questions that we ask every candidate. And that takes about 20 minutes. We do the code sample review for 15 minutes. And then the remaining time is for the candidate to ask questions of us. All right, next, Anna and Tanya will talk about training.
Yeah, I'll first hand it off to Anna to talk about the mentor perspective of training.
Great. Most undergraduate computer science departments don't teach Ruby or JavaScript or HTML and CSS or test-driven development, and even database design is often missing or cursory. So we found that training on these skill areas at the same time as onboarding to our projects on our team is pretty difficult. And then doing all of this in 6 hours per week makes it pretty hard to achieve like a continuity and flow in terms of actually fully participating on our projects. So we wanted to use the summer for a full-time training program so that during the school year, when undergraduates can only work a limited number of hours, they already have a solid foundation in those skills that they need to participate on our projects. And then we can provide that additional project-specific context as we go along. So we wrote up a list of all the skills that we thought a developer would need to work on our projects. And then we made trial accounts with several different Learn to be a Web Developer services. We were looking for a program that offered the instructional content we needed with a good user interface, but wasn't a full bootcamp school with instructors and one-on-one services, because we wanted to supply our own mentorship and other small projects.
Yeah, and this full-time training program really set the library developer position apart from other internship opportunities where interns would have to learn the skills on the job. It gave us the chance to build a solid foundation in things like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and web accessibility that most people learn as they're developing as they go. Yeah, next slide, please. So we used 2 platforms for training. On the left is Treehouse, and most of our training happened via Treehouse because it had courses on almost all the skills we need to learn, from HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to Ruby and Ruby on Rails. And the learning format was also very practice focused. So we would watch videos on a new concept, then practice it in an in-browser code editor, and finally have a multiple choice quiz to check our understanding. On the right is LinkedIn Learning, which is the other platform we used. And we used it to learn about RSpec and Ruby testing in general, since Treehouse didn't have such a course. And the LinkedIn Learning involved watching videos on each type of spec and using downloadable exercise files to practice. Unlike Treehouse, LinkedIn Learning didn't have quizzes or coding exercises to check our understanding. So a lot of the practice was left up to us. Next slide, please. And so after we'd finish a set of courses on Treehouse or LinkedIn Learning, we'd practice what we learned with checkpoint projects. For example, after finishing Treehouse's JavaScript courses, we were tasked with creating an in-browser implementation of Connect 4. Using JavaScript, we had to keep track of the state of the game, handle user input, and then reflect these changes on the front end. And these tasks were things we learned how to do in isolation via Treehouse. But the checkpoint project really forced us to use them in combination as one would in a real application. And here you can see on the left is Xander's project, and on the right is my project. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, and so these projects were not only a way for us to apply what we were learning, but we're also practice in making our own design choices. Our CS classes often provide us with an API we need to implement or very specific guidelines. So it was a challenge to embark on these projects without some provided structure. For example, our final project required us to use Ruby on Rails to create an application with a database. How we structured this database, what kind of objects we created, and what our user interface looked like was completely up to us. And ultimately, I think the full-time training period was crucial in acclimating us to Princeton University Library's tech stack, but also in preparing us for future software development careers where test-driven development, design patterns, and databases would no doubt come into play. Next slide, please. And now I'll hand it off to Xander to talk about how we were onboarded.
Thank you. So one of the main goals for this program is to get student developers to become actual full members of the development team. And this was achieved through an onboarding process. Having a mentor was integral to both team integration and product onboarding. We each had one mentor who we met with daily over the summer. During the training curriculum, meetings were an opportunity to check in on progress and help answer any questions. When we were working on the checkpoint projects, the meetings were important for code review and ensuring that we were following the team's test-driven, ticket-based development process. After training, mentors helped with determining which tickets to pick up and would pair with us on these tickets. It was useful for understanding how the projects were put together from developers who have experience working on them. Throughout training and onboarding, mentoring was extremely important as there are many small things that you can only pick up from experience. These include tricks to solving tickets and using different tools to optimize the development environment. So during the summer, we were first integrated into the team by attending the developer meetings. These included the daily team meetings, the Monday maintenance meetings, and the Friday wrap-up meetings. During these meetings, we learned of the dependencies for different projects, what it means for an issue to be specified, how developers work together, aka pairing, on a ticket, and how the team sets up different maintenance boards for organizing work, and just a lot more. We also had a retrospective meeting between the student developers and their mentors about summer training, which focused on what went well and what could be improved. It served not only as a reflection, but also as an introduction to team retrospectives. Around this time, the student developers also met with developers who were not their mentors to hear their story and how they got where they are today. Our meetings throughout the summer prepared us with a basic understanding of the different products the team works on. After finishing the training curriculum and our final projects, we started working on tickets and we're learning about the details of the different projects with the help of our mentors.
And just to share some of the reflections and things we've learned so far about a program like this, we will just each go around and talk about some of our reflections. So I just wanted to say that one really important thing we did was creating and maintaining documentation of the whole process of hiring, interviewing, and training. That's been really useful as we've iterated on these processes and as we share what we've learned with other teams. It's just really helpful to say, it's all right here. Here you go, take a look.
So one thing that we discovered was that through the process of training, there's a lot of software tooling and kind of like repository boilerplate that we had to work through at the mentor-mentee level. And we realized it would be nice to have like a reference for these topics. So we created a GitHub repository called Rails template to hold examples for the way we do things like continuous integration, style checking, coverage reports. And then that provides a reference that we can go back and look and say, hey, this is how you add Circle CI to our projects and things like that. And I think it's not only a useful reference for our student workers, but also for us. Sometimes you forget how to do things, and for any other people we onboard to our team in the future.
Yeah, and then we also found some areas for improvement when it came to training. For one, we found that it might be useful to have a list of resources such as books, articles, or videos on software engineering generally. So some examples are Design Patterns by Christopher Laster or conference talks given by Sandy Metz. That way, we as students could start engaging in the process of continuous learning and research that software engineers do over their career. And additionally, we realized some frameworks or tools used in production weren't completely covered in training, such as Solar or Blacklight. To address this concern, we thought it might be helpful to have a checkpoint project involving Solar or Blacklight so that we as students could gain familiarity with those technologies before working on issues with them in production. But nonetheless, using the summer for training was really helpful in providing grounding and context to what we would be working on once the school year started. It made the transition to working on issues quite smooth, only requiring us to be onboarded to the specific context of the application in question.
So one other thing we have worked on changing is the official name of the student developer position to become part-time software developer. This name change will look better on the students' resumes and possibly bring in more applicants to the program. We also plan to continue to hire more than one undergrad at a time. So we as student developers found that it was very helpful to have someone sort of at the same level to ask questions.
That is everything. So thank you very much for your attention today. And I think we do have some time for questions. Tanya's here, I'm here, and Elliot is here. So we're happy to use whatever time we have.
Yes, indeed. We have at least about 10 minutes here, and I don't see any questions in Slack yet or the Zoom Q&A.
I'd be very interested in hearing if other folks are have undergrads on your team too. So chat us in Slack for sure.
Okay, 2 questions have come in. So first one, there's a lot to learn in one summer. Did you find yourself going back to repeat in quotes training?
I think that question is for me. Yeah, there were definitely multiple times where we covered something during the courses, and then I would have to revisit them. Even currently, while we were learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, at the time, I felt like I had a very good foundation in JavaScript, but since most of the work we actually do is in Ruby and Ruby on Rails, while I'm fixing issues or bugs or visual design problems with Ruby on Rails applications, I have like some trouble remembering, oh, what was, how did I implement this in JavaScript? Like what's the bug? What's the bug in the Sass? Because these were things we had covered so early on in the training period. Now that we've got through so much material, it's less fresh in my mind. So yeah, there were definitely some topics I had to keep going over, some notes I had to take on commands like running Rubocop for our spec to refresh myself.
Thank you, Tanya. And next question, are the internships paid, and does the summertime training fit into a paid model?
Go ahead, Elliot.
I was gonna say yes, they're paid. The summer and the fall portions are both paid.
Yeah, and we always try to remind the undergrads on our team, like, don't do this in your spare time. This is part of your job. We really wanted to make sure that that was a big part of the program.
Nice. One comment that at UCSB, they do have undergrad intern on their team. Answering your question earlier. Anna, and then actually at Notre Dame, we've had some in the past as well, and that is something that I'm hoping to revitalize. So this is a very timely presentation. Thank you.
Great. I look forward to hearing how y'all do.
All right, looking to see if there's any last questions. We may be able to break a little bit early and have a few minutes before the random conversations session at 2 o'clock. I see someone typing, so I'll hold off on a moment here. Okay, a question came in, any pairing?
Do you want to take that, Tanya?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think while we were doing the checkpoint projects, there was some pairing, but that became even more crucial when we started working on the actual code base that the library was using for different applications. I've definitely worked on multiple GitHub tickets where I had no idea what was like happening because it would be a small part of this much larger application. And Anna and Trey and Elliot were always there. Like if any of the interns had questions, even if that wasn't our direct mentor, we could ask any of them questions if they were confused or if there was something we weren't sure about in the larger code base. And then also pairing was really helpful for being sure when I think as like software engineers or like incoming software engineers, we're still learning our place in these new code bases. So there were a lot of moments where I wasn't sure, should I be removing this? Am I I didn't have confidence in changing a specific part of the code. So pairing was really helpful for being sure, oh, this is a good change in the code. Yeah.
Another thing I would often do with my mentees is do the code review as a pair session. So look through the code together, talk about everything as we go through it, and then, you know, put my comment in the formal code review system in GitHub, but know that we've already like discussed it and decided together what to do moving forward.
Okay, one more question. After going through this, do you feel ahead of your peers? I think this is again for Tanya.
Yeah, definitely. I think I got to learn a lot about different practical technologies that they're not really teaching us in our coursework, from JavaScript to web accessibility to RSpec. And so from a technical skill point of view, I feel farther ahead than a lot of my peers who are like currently learning them in a CS course. And then also from in terms of learning what I want out of a workplace has been really important. Being able to talk to, in terms of mentorship, I got the chance to talk to a lot of the developers on the team who are later in their career. So they've been through a couple different workplaces, a couple different workplace difficulties. So really learning what I want out of a workplace has been helpful when I interview for internships and then also potentially new grad roles, and what questions I ask and the expectations I have out of a future career. So it's been good. I feel ahead technically, and then also in terms of what I want out of a software engineering career.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions coming through at the moment. All right, some very good questions. Again, thank you. Thank you all to presenters and for all the presenters that have presented today and previously. I see one more person typing, so there may be, we still have a few minutes here. We'll see if it is another question. Just to thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the presenters as well. So again, this is the end of the formal presentations for today. We do have a random conversation session starting in just a few minutes. The Zoom link, I believe, should have appeared in the Sched. I'll double check. Yes, it is there. So if you go to Sched, you'll be able to join the video stream link there. Again, thank you again for joining, and look forward to tomorrow for one more day of Samvera Connect. Thanks so much.